Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC episode 30 with Buck Black of Buck Black Therapy. Welcome back, OTC listeners. Thank you for stopping by again. Today marks episode 30, the big 30. And I know I've said it a number of times throughout the season, but it just the idea that we've reached the 30s is, just so mind-blowing. And that's all because of the listeners and the amazing guests that we've had on, and just really excited to be wrapping up season 1 here and then bringing season 2 to everybody in 2020. So today's episode is with Buck Black, who part of his therapy practice is providing what they call trucker therapy. So it's a very specific niche that you'll hear Buck talk about. You know, he just sort of realized it was a very underserved population that had a lot of need, and so looking at the occupational employment statistics, May 2018 is the most recent that they have from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and that's just the BLS.gov. They actually list heavy and tractor-trailer truck drivers make up just shy of 2 million jobs in the U.S. So there's a whole lot of people that are employed in this industry and are just on the road all the time, and it just makes me think of the Alabama song, 40-hour week for a living, talking about, truckers, and just the blue-collar workers throughout our country and all that they do to keep America running. And yeah, they're on the road so much, and they struggle with so many different issues. Everything from, physical and medical issues of, being seated and on the road so much, poor dietary habits, poor sleep habits, and that obviously can lead into major mental health issues in terms of depression and anxiety, PTSD type of issues if they've had a crash or something like that. Major relationship or family issues just from being away from home so much. So there's just a lot surrounding this occupation and the need for more awareness and more mental health services for this industry. Buck Black is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Indiana, and he earned his undergraduate degree from Purdue University. He actually double majored in psychology and sociology, and then he earned his master's degree in social work from Indiana University. So, like I mentioned, he's a licensed clinical social worker. He's a licensed clinical addictions counselor, a certified sex therapist, and a certified financial social work counselor. I really hope you take something from this episode, and if you know somebody that's in the trucking industry that you think might benefit from the information, please pass it on to them. Well, I have here on the show Buck Black, who is a trucker therapist out of Indiana, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. So welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So, trucker therapist, what is that? Explain it a little bit.
Well, I am a therapist, an LCSW, and I specialize in working with truck drivers. So I talk with truck drivers over the phone and video conference, because they're usually out on the road for quite some time. And they have a really hard time keeping their appointments. And of course, I do have an office, and if they want to come in and talk with me, then that works too. And from time to time, they do come in, but usually they're not able to.
Okay. So it's more them driving the truck, you're not driving around in a truck doing therapy. So yes.
No,
Okay.
no. I have had people think that though, and that would be an interesting additional income stream. So
Yes.
yes, I have thought about that.
Be like a big truck in the shape of like a Freudian, chaise lounge or something like that. So
Now you're just encouraging me.
So how did you even, get into that? How did you get started with being a trucker therapist?
Well, I've always been a fan of technology, and obviously I've been a fan of therapy. And it's been a little more than 10 years ago. I was sitting around thinking about, okay, I want to video conference my clients, and who would be the best person to do that with? What population? And well, I'm also just a big kid at heart anyway. And I always think that trucks are cool. And as time went on, I would have more and more truck drivers as clients in my office, and they couldn't keep their appointments. So I'm like, well, this is the ideal technology. And truckers, they're the ideal people because they can never keep their appointments. So it just made sense to me.
Well, yeah, it's such a cool idea. It's definitely, to me, it's a very underserved population. You think of, military application with, service people being deployed. And when I heard of the work that you do, I was like, man, that's amazing because, yeah, it's just one of those areas you don't often think of that. Yeah, they are on the road so much. They definitely have trouble, getting to appointments, keeping appointments, and increasing that accessibility is such a huge need. So, man. Now, when you got started with all of this, was this like pre all the, a lot of the state regulation and oversight? A lot of people were, sort of running and gunning before they put in policy.
Yes, and that's a whole big can of worms. And yeah, I think that's important to discuss. And to make a long story short, yes, I started before the regulations, and then I really had my heart broken with what happened.
Sure.
So when I started, it was in 2009. And at that point, it was, it was okay, and there would be a few people that would object to therapy over state lines, but the majority of whoever I would talk to would say, "Oh, well, it's okay," and so on. So anyway, I did it for several years, and there really wasn't too much of a concern. And then, as we all know, that the regulations got tighter and tighter. And, and then it's if you have a client with an address that is not in the state that you're licensed in, you could be sued, and, on and on and on. So I had to exclude my clients to only to addresses that are in my state of Indiana. And that really broke the model, because I was talking with drivers countrywide.
All over, I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and ironically enough, almost none of my clients were from Indiana. Is just the way that it worked out. So yeah, that was really hard. And then my clients were upset with me, and then several organizations in the trucking world, because I did all this networking. They're like, "Oh, what do you mean? You're dropping whatever 3/4 of your clients?" And I had to explain it, and in the end, people understood. But it was hard.
Sure, and I've even run into that in some of the counseling that I do with couples, of just them not being aware, understandably not being aware of counseling ethics and licensing and how all that works. And they'll go to, move out of state. And I'm like, I can't go with you. Like I can't continue working with you. And they're, floored and upset. So I can't even imagine, 3/4 of your caseload just being wiped out like that. Jeez.
Right. It was not good. And then also, I do work with at a distance with other people who are not truck drivers. And Purdue University is in the same city that my office is in.
Okay.
And so these college kids would go home for the summer, and then I'd say, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll continue, and we'll do phone or video over the summer. No big deal." Well, yeah, as luck would have it, the majority of the people are also from out of state that are the college kids. So then we ran into the same problems. So yeah, it really hit me all the way around. And I don't live that far from Illinois. And
Okay.
from time to time, a traditional client would be from Illinois. They'd come to my office, and then they'd be like, I want to make next week a phone session. And then I'm like, well, I can't. And, talk about technicalities. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So for any of the listeners, can you sort of outline your understanding? We'll put in the legal disclaimer of you are not responsible for anybody else's therapy, or you're not an attorney. And what is your understanding of the regulations as they currently sit?
Yeah, John. And yeah, I would agree with everything that you just said. That it's my understanding here that if the client has a physical address, if they live in the same state as your license, then it's okay to do distance therapy with them.
Yeah, if they're a resident of that state.
Yeah, yes, they have to be a resident, and I back it up with I have them, if I don't meet them in person, I have them just send a photo of their driver's license, and that way to make it official. So I know that piece, and then there is a bit of a gray area of even if they are a resident of your state and they travel out of state. There's mixed things that I hear that maybe it's not okay to talk with them when they are outside of the state lines. So I think that is a little bit of a gray area. And then if you want to be safe, then obviously you do the more conservative thing and say, well, you have to be within my state physically. So, yeah.
And then usually what I explain for people is, if you're going through insurance, it's not automatic that they cover teletherapy or phone therapy. Like, you really need to know your plan and really look into it and make sure that it covers that. Don't just assume. So,
yes, and I have that in my paperwork, and I use the place code that indicates that it is online therapy, and it's all automated for me. So I just click the button. I think it's number 2 or something like that, and I only take Anthem insurance in Indiana, and so far they do a great job with it, and I haven't had any problems.
Okay.
So I know the classic question is, what about all the other insurances? I don't know, and it seems like with insurance, it just varies from company to company and probably from plan to plan.
Yeah, well, and from just your clinical experience, and I always tell people, like, it can be just a tangled web, because you can have Anthem Medical, but then, your particular company, your particular plan, we don't cover mental health benefits, or we farm out mental health to Optum, or, stuff like that. So,
yes.
So know your plan, people. Know your plan. So in terms of the trucker therapy, are there stats I'd seen on your website, and some of the social media that you keep up, like, you've gone to different trade shows and conferences and things like that. Are there stats in terms of truckers and mental health?
Well, I haven't come across anything good. It just seems like
it's a bleak landscape.
Yes, and you use the word underserved, and it definitely is. And when I go to the trade shows, it is more of that I'm an oddity, and people are just like, what? And I have to explain it, 2 or 3 times. And so, unfortunately, in regard to any kind of statistics with mental health, not so much. if you go with the physical health, those numbers are out there to a fair degree in regards to the types of physical diseases that truck drivers get and those types of problems. But in mental health, I don't really see anything out there, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's even, they usually say, even when you have statistics, they're wrong. They're usually lower than, the numbers come in lower than they actually are. Usually people underreport a lot of things, unfortunately. And so on the mental health side of things, or the medical, what do you see in terms of truck driving population? What do they typically struggle with in terms of medical stuff?
Well, in regards to the medical, what you see a lot would be sedentary related diseases, which wouldn't be any kind of shock if you think about,
what they're doing.
You drive all day long. Exactly. So a lot of heart disease, cardiac types of conditions, and then diabetes would be another one. And just in general, the quality of food is not good out there. And truck stops are having more fresh fruit and vegetables, so there are improvements there. But, that's a concern overall. So it would be things related to poor diet and poor exercise. With diabetes and heart problems being way up there. And then something that's a lesser known, but it is becoming more and more publicized, is that truck drivers are getting more skin cancer as well as just simply skin damage because the sunlight coming through the cab damages the skin. Even though you're behind glass, it doesn't block all of the UV.
Huh.
So that is a problem, and that's becoming more and more well known. So drivers need to protect themselves from the sun and wear sunscreen and long sleeve shirts, and most of them don't even know about it, and they don't think anything of it.
Wow. Yeah, no, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah.
And I also would have assumed issues around sleep.
Right. Yes.
Just obviously now, I think of it a lot of times almost like high school wrestling now. Like there's a lot more regulation around high school wrestling and what coaches can and can't do and weigh-ins and things like that. And my understanding is there have been positive changes in terms of regulations over like how long a person can drive and team driving and things like that. Have you found that to be true? Or?
Well, we have to be careful of the word positive because
yes.
From a health standpoint, yes, it's limited to 11 hours per day of driving. And then it gets a little more complicated than that you can be on for so long and then you have to have what they call a reset. Mm-hmm. So to take time off. So from a health standpoint, yes, that is positive. The majority of the drivers don't like it. It cuts into productivity.
Which cuts into pay.
Exactly. And then they might not be in a good place where they can stop because they use the electronic logs. And so the console will pop up and it will say, hey, you need to take a break now, and you've got 30 minutes to do so. And if you're not in a good place to do it, you're in trouble. So either you drive illegally or you park in an unsafe place. So that's the complaint. Yes. Overall, I would say it is a good thing because we don't want people driving tired. So yes, absolutely.
Well, and interesting because yesterday I talked with Dr. Matt Carter. He's a professor up at Williams College who he teaches about good sleep hygiene. So I kind of had that in mind with talking to you today. So what are some trends and issues that you're seeing from the population that you're working with? What types of struggles are they having?
I'll roll with the sleep because that is very common. Even with the regulations, drivers typically don't get enough sleep. And many times they don't realize the need to sleep. And they look at it more as a luxury than a necessity. And so truck drivers in general don't have very good structure, and they might sleep during the day one day, sleep at night the next, and it's back and forth because those are the demands of the job.
Yeah.
So you've got difficulty with routine, and then less of an emphasis on the sleep. And then another piece is that often you're not in a quiet place. So truck stops are noisy, or if you park along the interstate, that's noisy. And then, as we know, that when a person is sleeping, the brain still processes the auditory portion. So you still hear everything that is going on, even though you're asleep. And a lot of drivers don't know that. So the quality of sleep is a concern. And then I also mentioned the food. So plenty of times I will have people who they are not getting enough sleep. They are not getting proper nutrition. And that alone is causing the mood problems, such as depression, anxiety, anger, and those kinds of things. And then they come to me and I'm like, well, let's get your eating and your sleep under control. See what happens.
Well, yeah, I can definitely, if you throw in, diabetes with that, I usually walk people through that sort of hypoglycemic diabetic checklist of like, when was the last time you ate? When was the last time you slept?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would imagine a fair amount of, relationship issues in terms of, it's hard being on the road that much and not being home with your family and things like that.
Absolutely. And John, you can pretty much trace all of my clients back to having a relationship problem in some degree. There is, plenty of times it is the classic couples therapy kind of conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
And it's complicated because if you're a truck driver, you're automatically in a long distance relationship. And plenty of times they don't look at it that way. And I tell them that in the beginning. And then they're like, oh, well, okay, maybe I need to look at this from a different angle. So sometimes it's that classic piece of that. And then other times it is the lack of a relationship because maybe they're single and they drive for months at a time. Maybe they don't even have a house and they live in their truck, or, just kind of pretty much overall, they live in their truck. And yes, they do have a physical address. So it's more of the loneliness. So either the relationship is broken or it's a lack of relationship. So it just depends on the driver.
Now, when you do, I saw on your website, you'll also do couples counseling and sex therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And so are you able to do, one spouse or one partner is in the office and one is, tele through the phone or through the computer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah. We do it that way sometimes. I've even done conference calls before. And if the clients are comfortable with the technology, then it works really well. And, I've done just like old-fashioned conference calls, and it's flowing and it works really nice because everybody's comfortable with it. And if one person is not comfortable with it, then it is just a disaster. And then we have to say, "Ooh, we're not going to do this." Yeah, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, also to throw out there. They're not driving while, like maybe on the phone, but not the video.
Right. Yes, we do not want that going on. And I don't want the drivers to be on the phone either. So yeah, all that is bad news. And yes, people try to do anything.
Yep.
So yeah.
And so what are some myths or struggles that you run into? I can think of a couple. But yeah, I'll reserve those. I want you to go first.
Well, I think that there's a lot of them out there. But if you look at one of the main ones that I see would be it's the macho man kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That, hey, I'm a truck driver. I don't need to talk about my feelings. I don't have feelings, and then they end up calling as a last resort and not the first resort. And when I'm talking to them, things are in such bad shape, then it's really tough.
Yeah.
So, that is really, really common. And then the typical, well, I don't need to talk about what's going on. I just need to take pills. So that is another one that I see quite a bit. Yeah. John, what are the ones that you're thinking about?
Well, yeah, I was going to kind of start with the one you did. Growing up, we had the Griswold Caprice Classic station wagon with like the fake wood paneling and the cool turret seat in the back. And we always had a CB in the car. So I was very used to, the lingo and getting on the horn and talking to people in other caravans or trucks or things like that. And it always called up the image of Jerry Reed from Smokey and the Bandit. Like you got your best basset hound buddy next to you, and you've got your plaid shirt and your trucker hat, and but yeah, that very macho. I don't talk about feelings. I don't open up about my problems, and I think also some that are maybe ex-military, that's even more reinforced. Where it's,
sure.
You could lose your clearance, you could lose your job. Based on certain things. That was the main one. And have you seen, in terms of just corporate reaction to your presence at the trade shows? Do you find that they're trying to find resources for their employees and connect them with, like EAP or things like that?
Well, unfortunately, it's usually lack of interest, and I probably it's lack of understanding that the drivers will be more productive if they were to have access to a therapist. And the companies talk about driver retention, and that's been the key word.
The buzz term.
Yes, for the last several years. But then it's like, well, what are they doing to retain the drivers? And well, at least from a mental health standpoint, pretty much nothing. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big problem out there. And I'll tell you, the positive responses that I have had have always been from small companies. And I have done actually quite a bit of work with small companies in a EAP type setup. I mean, they just did a contract with me, but think of EAP. And the small companies were great to work with. And I'm talking about, I don't know, maybe they had a dozen drivers or something. And the big companies, they don't want to talk to me. They don't want to talk about it. So that's what I'm seeing out there.
And I remember way back in grad school, I actually had one of my first professors. He talked about, he was a professor, obviously, but he also did work, and he specifically worked with trucking companies. And he, sort of using those buzz terms was like, he would get a meeting with, the corporate and be like, I can reduce I can improve your driver retention by X amount. Mm-hmm. So connecting with them in that sort of EAP sense. You're listening to OTC Episode 30 with Buck Black of Buck Black Therapy. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Would you like to talk to a counselor but can't find the time? Would you rather talk to someone from the comfort of your own home? If so, Parenting and Family Solutions is here to help. We now offer teletherapy to all clients who reside in the state of Pennsylvania. Using our secure portal, you can have a video session with your counselor using a laptop, desktop computer, or smartphone. Visit our website to learn more at www.parentfamilysolutions.com or give us a call at 717-602-5560 to see if teletherapy might be a good fit for you. Let us help you build a stronger family and a healthier you.
And going back to the stereotypes, would you say across the board, a a lot of your clients should have been calling you way before they did. Like they waited too long almost.
Sure. And unfortunately, that's kind of across the board in mental health, at least with my experience. And I would say the drivers are worse about it. And something that's kind of interesting is the better clients that I have that are drivers are the women, because they are more proactive and they don't have the macho thing that so many guys do. And they just do so much of a better job. However, I'm less likely to have female clients because, well, they're only, I don't know, it depends what stats you look at, but I'll say around 2 to 5% of the drivers are females. And then they think that I only want to talk with men. Mm-hmm. And then they're even less likely to call. And I have had several who say, well, I just thought that it was just this big macho thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's trucking. Your name is Buck. You know, and then I tell them, I'm like, well, actually, no offense to anybody, but my female clients are so much easier to talk with in general.
Less barriers to break down.
Yeah, they're more proactive and all that. So really, yeah. I'd rather have female truck driver clients. It works better. So anyway.
Well, and I was going to say with trends, I would imagine, just kind of what you were saying, just an increase in female drivers over the years. I would imagine, decades ago it was, almost unheard of for a female driver. Is that your understanding?
I don't really know. I think that over the past 10 years that I've been doing this, I think it's been pretty steady. And if anybody really wants to find out the answer, the organization Women in Trucking, they are really good at tracking all of this. And I've interacted with Women in Trucking, and they're a cool company. And yes, I think years and years ago, there were typically, there were no female drivers. So it has increased some, but my understanding is probably in the past 10 years, I think it's been fairly flat in the number of women drivers.
Okay.
So hopefully that grows. Yeah.
And then other issues, other struggles that you run into?
Well, there's all kinds of them. I mentioned meds, about the drivers that only want meds. And then I'll talk about the flip side of that, is that there are plenty of drivers that need meds. Yeah, they need them. And then they say that the trucking regulations say that I cannot be prescribed any psychiatric medication whatsoever. And they're very adamant about it. So I researched this, and the best language that I see, and I've seen it only just a couple of times, is up to the discretion of the physician. If the physician says that you are safe to drive on this medication, then it's okay. And then I'll be doing an interview on satellite radio, and it'll be a call-in show and so on. Mm-hmm. And then you get truckers who will argue with me, and they'll be like, oh no, I cannot take any psychiatric meds and I'll lose my license. And so that's like a big thing out there that so many truckers believe, but that's not the case. So you have to talk with your doctor about it and get it worked out. And if your doctor approves it, and then, run it past your company too, then you should be okay. So I think that's a big one. And I've got one other myth if you want me to go into.
Sure. No, go ahead.
It's like the myth of being the machine, that the driver can go on and on for months on the road, even when they have a family, and it should be okay. And it's like, well, I'm making money and it's all right.
Yes.
They forget that they need time off, and they forget that they're human. So I would say that's another big one that I deal with on a day in and day out kind of basis here.
And specific to that one, I would imagine you run into a lot of, not so much generational curses. I know that a lot of people would bristle at that term, but, you think of moms and dads that modeled for decades, or grandparents that modeled, you're just a workhorse. You just,
mm-hmm.
This is my love language, is providing and acts of service. And the way I show love is I go out and I earn a living and I provide for you all. and that drive to keep doing that.
Right. Absolutely. So, I mean, it's great to make the money, but if you're never home, then, well, that's not good for your family, and that's not good for you either. So then that becomes problematic.
Sure. And are you able to share just a general technique or two that you find super helpful for a lot of the clients that you work with? Are there standard ones you kind of do with everybody, or I don't know if you'd share a particular one or two?
Sure. I would say that in general, it is just typical therapy that I do with my drivers. Part of it would be emphasizing the need for home time, which we've already discussed. Mm-hmm. So routine as well. So that's another one that's really even more specific for the drivers. So I think that's a couple of big ones. And one thing that we don't think of, but it's very specific to drivers, is that oddly enough, there's so many of them that will listen to talk radio all day long and pretty much all of their waking hours. Huh. And they end up developing this exhaustion because they're focused, especially on the negative news and so on.
No, I definitely could see that.
Yeah. So it's not really a technique, but I'm like, turn on some music. And I tell them, there's like a thing called music therapy. And that's, and it's like, well, just give yourself some basic music therapy by taking a break.
My brother and I grew up, my dad loved country music. So my very first concert was when I was 6 years old. It was Alabama and Dolly Parton. And, growing up, of course, my brother and I rebelled against that, and we're like, it's so depressing. It's so negative. My relationship ended. My dog died. So yeah, I could see with the talk radio, especially like just all the doom and gloom. I didn't even, think of that as a occupational hazard, so to speak.
It is. And the other occupational hazard is the boredom, because for the typical over-the-road driver, it's hours of the interstate. And, once you get to the location, then, it gets a little more interesting, sometimes in a good way and other times in a bad way. Yeah. So nonetheless, it is, how do you deal with the thoughts in your own head? So then that turns more into the CBT stuff of making sure that you have positive self-talk. You don't focus on the negatives. You find something else to focus on, and that kind of thing. Because that's the disease, is loneliness and then too much time to think. And just about every new client will say, I've got too much time to think. And they'll ask me, do you know what I'm talking about? I'm like, yeah, every driver tells me that. So yeah, it's basic therapy, and it's adjusted just a little bit. Yeah.
Now, in your work, have you come across much in terms of the human trafficking end of things? I know I didn't originally put that in the questions, but just in my own work, I've done a lot of trainings for people on, sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Have you run into that at all?
Not really. It's I know that there are like Truckers Against Trafficking. Mm-hmm. There are organizations in the trucking world that they talk about it, and they're quite vocal. I have had drivers who have told me that they have seen what appears to be trafficking going on, and they have reported that, and they've seen that at truck stops, and they've talked about that a little bit. I have had drivers who are like in the sex addiction type of realm, and they're talking about patronizing prostitutes and how they want to stop and the difficulty they have with that. But as far as specific sex trafficking, it is something that my clients really never discuss. So is it out there? Of course. They're just really not talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and I was familiar with some of those organizations, and I know, so I'm on East Coast, and I think it was a couple of years ago, there was a major bust at a truck stop because a trucker saw some stuff going on at the truck stop and was like, something doesn't add up, and wound up calling and broke a major case. So it was, yeah. So what I'll do here is I have a couple of listener questions that got sent in. So just the first one is pretty general, but the question came in of just how can I work on my marriage while I'm still on the road, which I imagine you get a fair amount of.
Having relationship problems on the road is really, really common. So some of the basic things that I tell people on a regular basis is do video chats back home as often as you can. And don't save it until the end of the day when you are about to go to bed, because you're so tired, you've been through it all, and there's not going to be a lot of you left. Yeah. So I think that's something that's very important. And if you have a family, just go ahead and, do what works, play around with it. So either do a video chat with the individual kids or do it as a family, whatever works. That's something that's very helpful. And save time so it's one-on-one with your partner in private, so you have that as well. So that's a really good thing. It is difficult with parenting as far as, well, what kind of decisions do you make on the road? And, the basic stuff and so on, that can be good, as well as any kind of relationship issues that you talk about the feelings, you talk about what's going on, you have the day-to-day communication. Where people get really tripped up would be two really big things that I see. One of them is trying to discuss something very, very, very serious when you are at a distance. So I'm going to say, if possible, just simply avoid that.
Yeah, table it.
If you are coming home on a regular enough interval, then when you have home time, then address it. So hopefully you'd be coming home, at least every couple of weeks. So if you are out for months at a time, okay. If you have to talk about things, talk about things. But at minimum, use your voice. Talk on the phone, video conference is best. So the second thing that I'm alluding to is, you probably guessed it, it is people who text about very serious things, and that never goes well.
No.
That is not good.
And we still do it.
Yes, because it's easy, it's instant, and then it usually blows up. And then before you know it, you're wanting extra sessions with me, and it's all because you're tired and you're texting.
Yep. Yeah, I often tell people, there's only so much you can do with emojis. Like, yes, they're always adding emojis, but it's too easy to misinterpret it, and somebody takes it the wrong way. They read into, well, why did it take you so long to respond? Or it looked like you started to type and then it went away and then you started typing again. And yeah, it's not a good idea. So thank you for saying that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Do everyone a favor.
So those are the big things that I see in regards to the relationships.
Okay.
And and when possible, come home and work on things, and don't be out on the road for weeks at a time. Mm-hmm. And I have heard more than one driver say that when I have to get a haircut when I'm out on the road, an indicator I've been gone too long.
That's the signal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you started to get into it, of parenting. Like, how do you stay connected to the kids? I mean, would you kind of just echo the same thing of doing some video chats and checking in? I imagine that's got to be super hard for a parent that's on the road, that they are the truck driver, of some of the guilt and the frustration over missing the little league games or the birthdays or things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I've had parent drivers who say, "I'm watching my kid grow up on Skype. How sick is that?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you find more buck blacks in the States? How do you find a therapist who works with truck drivers?
Well, that is really tricky, unfortunately.
Yes.
And
there is only one Buck Black.
Yes, I suppose so. So the good news is there are more and more therapists that are doing online therapy. And if you Google for online therapists or telemental health, whichever keywords you'd like to use, in your specific state, then you're able to come up with some people. And I would say to the drivers out there, don't get hung up on the fact that the therapist needs to know about truck driving.
Okay.
Yes, it helps, but in general, the therapist will still be quite helpful. Mm-hmm. So I get a lot of clients that, they really want to make sure that I know about trucking. And I have never been a truck driver, and I have a few potential clients or new clients that are turned off because I've never driven a truck. Mm-hmm. So I would say, well, I get that, but don't get too hung up on that.
Yeah, a lot of times that idea of it's much more important for you to have the clinical skills and the background,
yep,
as opposed to the trucking knowledge. Or you run into that a lot with substance abuse,
sure,
military. You run into that a fair amount, I've found. So yeah, I like the way Joe Sanok explains it. He talks about if you went to a French restaurant, they might be able to make you a hamburger, but if you went to a diner and wanted them to make French food, you probably wouldn't want to eat that. And that idea of having that clinical knowledge is pretty important. So, and in terms of just if you were talking to every trucker, every trucking company, what do you wish they knew about mental health?
Well, I think that it is remembering that we are all social beings, and we have to stay social. We have to stay connected. And you were talking earlier about, being on the CB and all of this, and that has pretty much gone away.
Yeah.
And with what is on the CB is not positive.
Yeah.
So it's, and most of my drivers, they just leave the CB off unless if they get stuck in a traffic jam. And sometimes they don't even turn it on then. So anyway, it's remaining connected. It's getting your home time. And I always ask drivers to join some kind of a professional organization. And there's quite a few out there. And some of them are just simply conference calls, and they have a topic. And, it's the Trucking Solutions Group is the name of one of them. And it's very helpful. So anyway, find something. I think that's very important. And just realize that the being macho and the having nothing bother you and all of that hurts mental health. That is not the answer. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, mental health and physical health are related. They're two sides of the same coin. So if you take care of your body, then your mental health will be good, and vice versa. So those are the things that I want people to know. And just be aware and get your rest.
Well, and I like that you highlighted the professional organizations. Just some type of connection, some type of is that accountability? Is that just something other than you being alone with your thoughts hours upon end, driving throughout the country? Yeah. So, where can people find you? What are you on? You on social media? What's your web URL?
Well, I am on Facebook, and my website is buckblack.com.
Fairly standard. Nice.
Yeah.
It's easy to remember. And now the bow tie, has that always been a fixture? Is that?
It has been. And okay. When I was an intern in college, I started wearing a bow tie, and it kind of stuck. So it's
You've been
fun.
rocking the bow tie since way back when.
Yes. I've got quite the collection of them. So yeah. It's a good time. I think that one should not take themselves too seriously.
Sure. Well, and I think also, part of the mental health, being able to laugh at things, laugh at yourself, have fun with things. I try to stress that, especially for the kids that I meet with. I try to keep it light and get serious when we need to. I think
Right.
for so many people, they come into mental health with like, oh gosh, this is going to be awful, and I really don't want to do this. So I find the more I'm able to lighten it up a little bit, the better it goes.
Yeah, we all need to use comedy in therapy. And I tell my clients to watch as many comedies as they can. And on satellite radio, they have comedy channels and podcasts and so on. So yeah, absolutely, we need to do that.
Mm-hmm. So for rest of 2019, 2020, any major projects you got coming up, stuff you're working on, or yeah?
Using as much comedy as possible. And I tell my clients that my personal New Year's resolution is to watch more comedies.
Okay.
And they usually are speechless. And then eventually they're like, yes, that is amazing. And then they end up adopting it as well. So yeah, I think just keep it light and have a good time. I think that's the main thing to be doing here. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and definitely easier these days with, like you said, satellite radio, but also obviously there's been a huge push back to the roots of, stand up with a lot of the streaming services. It seems like everybody's coming out with a stand-up tour again. I was just watching Jim Gaffigan's newest one last night. And who are some of your favorites?
Well, I have seen Jim Gaffigan a handful of times in person, and
nice.
And we're both Hoosiers, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, and I just watched on a recommendation from a client. Dennis Miller has a fairly new Netflix stand-up, and that was pretty decent. So yeah, I just watched him. And it's just kind of fun to get on Netflix and just see what's out there.
Sure, yeah. Now, are you gonna break into stand up yourself? Are you gonna do any improv or comedy or no?
Well, I would love to, but you know what? I think I'm gonna stick with this therapist gig.
Yeah.
It just seems to be working.
That's comedy enough.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, anything else you'd share with the folks?
Well, just keep being proactive and don't wait until the last minute to change something in your life. And take a look at the successful people that the successful people that are, famous and there's documentaries, and look at what they do and just mirror more of their behaviors. And you don't see successful people who are stuck in the negativity and things aren't working and they continue to do the same. They always do something different. So I think a lot of it is just the modeling. And don't forget that diet plays a huge part, not only in overall health that we all know, but also your mood. So that's another reason to, eat your fruits and vegetables and stay away from the processed junk. So I think those are the main things. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of it, not a whole lot has changed since, we were little kids growing up of like, eat your vegetables, get good sleep, all that kind of stuff.
It's old-fashioned grandma advice. And
it still works.
Yeah.
Turns out they knew what they were talking about.
We just have to be careful with our technology.
Yes.
Use it as a tool, and it can turn against you. But, cars kill people, and we really couldn't make it without cars as well, obviously. So use the tools appropriately.
Yeah, I always say, you can overdo or abuse anything. You can drink too much water, so things that we would use for good can be used for evil and vice versa. But well, Buck, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. I loved, when Clay Cockrell, I was interviewing him, he mentioned you. I was like, man, I gotta find out about this. So thank you so much for what you're doing, the people that you're helping, and keep on keeping on.
All right, John. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Sure. Take care.
You too.
So that puts episode 30 in the books. Thank you for joining me for another session on the couch. And just to summarize, so one of the things that I took from that is just, so many people going with the trucking and automotive metaphor of we wait until the check engine light comes on, and we wait till there's a major breakdown in our system. And there are people out there that do teletherapy, that do phone sessions. You just need to be honest with yourself and really take a look at, okay, I really think I'm struggling in an area and I need to talk to somebody. And reach out. You can reach out to Buck. He may be able to point you in the right direction, maybe in a different state. You can search Psychology Today. There's goodtherapy.org. I know there's Therapy Den is another directory. So there's just so many different therapy directories out there. There's even ones for online counseling. So please, take a look. Try to get connected to somebody, because there are services out there that you could be tapping into that might help you with whatever it is you're struggling with. In OTC episode 31, I'll be speaking with Julie Ohana of Culinary Art Therapy. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe and review wherever you're catching this podcast at. You can check out detailed show notes and archived episodes at www.pfsonthecouch.com. If you want to stay up to date on future guests and contribute questions, be sure to follow us on your favorite social media platforms. The author and host of this podcast is not engaged in a therapeutic relationship with the listener and cannot give counseling advice without a confidential appointment. Listeners should be sure to consult with a licensed therapist in their area or seek emergency medical attention if they are experiencing psychological difficulty. A special thanks to the band The Topsy-Turvies for the show theme song. Their song, Like a Living Dead, can be found at topsyturvies.bandcamp.com. The bump interview track was the song 1973 by Bruno E. The author and host of this podcast is John Dennis. Special thanks to editor and show producer Trevor Groff.